Hey, we're live on the air to the globe, everyone. So welcome to another Animal Rights show, and I hope you could.
We've got the cat bum already.
Hi, everyone.
Got the
Getting in there early.
Look at that. We've got at least one bum already. So this essentially is our kind of second socialization programs or shows, and we're going to kind of really focus in on children's socialization because that's the kind of start of it, in the sense that you've got this interesting thing about we always say that children are kind of natural animal lovers, or they've got a natural empathy for other animals and everything. And so where does that go, and what is the process by which that kind of changes? So we can talk about a few things like that. We have a guest, everyone, a new guest panelist. So Lynda Korimboccus. I knew I'd got that wrong. So it's Lynda Smith, everyone, and
Cop out.
Yeah, I know. I've said it in my head about 20 times. I knew I'd get that wrong.
We shouldn't say Diplodocus.
Yeah. So Lynda, what the hell is your second name?
Korimboccus.
Korimboccus. And why have you got such a ridiculous second name? That's what I want to know.
Welcome, Lynda. Thank you for being here.
Is that a real question? Thanks for having me. It's lovely. Other than that question.
Yeah. So Lynda, you've got specializations in psychology and sociology and also anthrozoology, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I have lost somebody. I have a bunch of ologies, really. So
yeah, we're having some technical problems today, folks. So if we lose people, in fact, Wendy was supposed to be the one that we lost, not Tom. So do you want to do a few intros, Wendy, maybe?
Yeah, I'd love to. Let me just scroll up and see who's here. So hello, Jonah. Nice to see you, Jonah. And Michael, our regulars here. Gawain. I always wonder if I'm saying that right. I hope I'm saying that right, Gawain. Amber is here as well. Ronnie Lee. Hey, Ronnie. Burb Brannick and Bernie V. Deb Thompson. Sorry, I don't know why I'm saying all your surnames as well. Icy Turner says he's not well. Well lit. Sorry if I thought you were saying you weren't well there. I see. But yeah, nice of you to join us, I see. And Girly Zero or Girly O. Welcome to everyone. And welcome back, Tom.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had the YouTube channel open and then I had the stream mode open. I could hear the repetition and I thought it was an issue, but I just had to close the YouTube. Sorry, it's just a creative problem. Anyway.
Yeah, there's always one. There's always one. So we thought really we'd open by just kind of having a bit of a conversation, and we're inviting Lynda to join in at any time, kind of about the socialization process. It's a kind of core part of the development of human beings. And in sociology, we talk about three types, although the last one is kind of almost like ignored really, but we talk about primary socialization, we talk about secondary, and we talk about adult. So we're kind of probably going to be really talking mainly about primary and secondary. And primary is the first socialization you get. So it's the idea that human beings are pretty kind of useless when they're born. They can't do much. And so we've got to be kind of taught by our kind of, our socializing agents. We've got to be taught to do a lot of kind of basic things, like go to the toilet, use knives and forks, all those kind of very basic things. And that's usually, not always, but usually in the family setting. So that's usually where the first socialization we get. And then things change when we move into secondary socialization. As soon as you start getting secondary socialization agencies, then you start to get a lot of contradictions, and you get tensions in what people learn, because corporations start to speak to people, and peers start to speak to people. Peer groups are very important, as we know, when we're kids, So whatever your parents might have said, that might have been law at the beginning, and then suddenly 3 years later you think your parents are jerks and they don't know anything. And so all of that is the kind of processes that we're going through. Would you agree with all that so far, Lynda?
Yeah, indeed, I would indeed.
I have a question. So obviously, as a young kid, we love other animals, and then somehow we end up eating them.
Yeah.
Would you say that this is part of the primary or the secondary socialization? When does this happen? When do we learn to conceptually distance ourselves, the animals, wait from the animals we love?
It could. I'll answer that first, and maybe Lynda can answer that same question. It could be both. For example, Stanley Sapon is a psycholinguistic professor. He says that we, almost like within the family, we first of all give people or kids a story that everything is sweetness and light between us and other animals. They're our friends. They're, we're friends to them. And this is the first story that we give to children. And we often give them examples of that through the early reading type examples. But then he says, in fact, his research question was, what happens when they get older? We have to kind of make them aware of what really happens in the world. And so he says the 2-tier value system. He says we teach them the kind of sweetness and light story, and then we teach them what really happens. And I said that how we can do that with what really happens is then start talking about categories. Well, these other animals are pets. These other animals are the ones we eat. These ones are vermin. And so we start to categorize them. And so we kind of cue our children in that the actual story that we initially gave them wasn't quite correct. So that can happen all within the family, but it can also happen when secondary socialization comes in as well, because suddenly children's learning becomes far more complicated when you've got many more socializing agents suddenly coming in, telling you contradictory stories. Yeah, and then you go back to your initial socializing agent and say, "Hang on a minute, you didn't tell us this and you didn't tell us that," and so you've always got that problem. I mean, it's a little bit like you can imagine the cube of truth. You've got the sweetness and light kind of thing, and then the family walks up to a cube of truth, and the kid goes, "You didn't tell me about that." So that could be a version of that. Yeah. What would you say, Lynda, on that?
I'd say actually a lot of the problem that's absolutely right, but I think a lot of the problem is that the caregivers don't know themselves. They've been taught to categorize from their parents and so on. So it's so ingrained in our culture that it's actually very difficult maybe to distinguish what the truth is actually. So you end up with you're taught, your parents teach you what they think is the right thing. They teach you certain views about things and your life view, generally speaking, and you don't question it. You're absolutely right. And sometimes it might be fluffy and light, but kids come back from going to a city farm for the day, and they've been feeding the lambs and stuff, and it's like, is this like the same lamb that we eat? And that's a question that a parent then has to answer, and often rather than, I think they can do that. Well, it's not exactly the same. And rather than identify the fact it's a different individual, they would actually almost sugarcoat that part. But otherwise, but otherwise, I think parents don't really know themselves, because they're all eating meat as well. They were raised to do it probably, but they're same as I was. I was raised eating meat, didn't question it, didn't even know you could question it. And only now I'm raising a vegan child myself do I realise just how impervious that's been. It's been absolutely everywhere. So it's very difficult. And then you've got all the messages from TV and books and everything that we're going to be talking about today that just reinforce these messages. And in the education system, with the books that they get and the stories that they tell and the sanctuaries, they don't even take to sanctuaries, they're taken to farms. So you put all these things together, movies, and before you know it, I mean, kids just won't question because it's almost a given.
So how this categorization happens is always according to the utility of other animals to humans.
Essentially, yeah. This one is for. We use this for. We access that for. So this is the ones that we go to see, and we pay money to go and see, and we just stand stare at them for 2 minutes and then go to see the next one in the zoo or whatever. This is the one. These are for eating. We raise these cows to be food. We don't usually use the word kill or whatever. And that's an interesting question coming in there from Deb. Religion, again, is very similar to that. You raise your kids the best way that you think, how you've been raised. And if that's veganism, then fine. If it's not, then which it's usually not here, then that's what you do. And in the same way, if you have religion, you pass that on as well. So these things are just part of the process of learning how to be a human in your family. And then everybody else just reinforces that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of caveats that we need to enter fairly early on in this conversation.
Okay.
Which is that there is obviously a difference between children who are raised in an urban setting and children who are raised in a rural setting. So that's one thing to take into account. And also cultures can be different in the sense that some cultures are much more honest about our use and exploitation, oppression, whatever you want to call it, of other animals, and it's all there right in front of people. Yeah. We tend to hide it. We hide houses of slaughter and that kind of stuff. And then there's this other issue, which is part of socialization, which is that one job that parents take on is to protect their children from knowledge. And so that's a very important thing. It's not just in terms of the fact that we slaughter other animals that they might think that they love, that kind of thing, but we also do that in things like sexual relations, the kind of danger they might be in, particularly maybe small girls, those kind of ideas, right? And so, in some ways, parents have got to judge, even if they've got the knowledge and they want to give it to the children, they've got to judge when they can anyway. So it can become quite complicated in that sense.
It's almost like a tooth fairy conversation, isn't it? At what point do you do it? Do you not? Do you do Santa? Do you do Easter Bunny? And if you do, you then have to undo it later. So sometimes it's easier to have the kind of, that's a nice story, that'll do. And at some point, I just think it. I still remember my grandpa sitting drinking Santa's Drambuie. I was raging. That's Santa's grandpa and his penguin biscuit. You can't be drinking that. So, but at the same time, I was like, I did wonder, I did think maybe that wasn't a real thing. But and I understand, especially now that I'm a parent, that, you do want to protect your kids from harm. And there's age-appropriate ways of telling them what the truth is.
And then you got the bad news about the tooth fairy, did you, Lynda?
Well, actually,
what do you mean bad news about the tooth? What do you mean there's no tooth fairy?
Oh, come on. Sorry. We've got a couple of interesting points made by Grumpy.
Okay.
Yeah. So, what do the panel think about that? Because I've not seen Dominion, so I can't really answer that. But I imagine it's pretty tough to watch.
Yeah, yes, I think, not only under 6, under 12 maybe, would be traumatized by Dominion. I mean, I believe that there are other ways to talk to children about the truth.
There are a couple of books that I'm going to be talking about later, I mentioned later, Ruby Roth writes, have a way of explaining what happens to the animals without it being too gory or upsetting, but it's still truthful. So there's bags of websites, and there's so many resources on different animal rights groups, Animal Aid, Vegan Society, even for kids, just to kind of focus you in on maybe how to deliver that message, or especially because I think you've mentioned earlier as well, if the parents don't agree, I think it's important to be honest. But there are consequences.
There's an issue again from Danny about. Do you think educating my granddaughter to become vegan is ethically wrong if the parents don't agree? That kind of points to the fact that inter-family relationships can be really strained by this process of, one person being kind of vegan and others not, and this kind of stuff.
I have 2 family members, and one of them is vegan, and her husband is not vegan. she wants to raise their son, on a plant-based diet, but he's also started feeding him fishes. So I don't know what that conversation has been like. It speaks to what Roger's saying about that there is, I think, possibly some strain there.
I mean, it's strain. My husband's not vegan, but he's vegan in the house. That was the deal. So the back of his car is full of Murder King wrappers and Kentucky Fried Cruelty and all that stuff. Anyway, apparently just coffee, but I don't believe him. But it's an important thing, because it's the same way as if you have two different religions meeting and marrying or getting together. Okay, what you got to pick something, right? You can't. So that's not an easy discussion to have. But I mean, I did say that we wouldn't be doing it if they weren't going to be vegan, he or she. It was a girl, as it happens. But not everybody would be happy with that conversation. So that's, you've got to take it. Sorry, Wendy.
Sorry, Lynda. No, I was just going to say, it's an important point, isn't it? That actually because Roger was talking about, we're bringing up children and we're trying to protect them, but we're also bringing up children to fit in to the culture that we're in. So it's really important point that to remember that where you're always kind of thinking of what you should tell them, what knowledge you should give them, and how is that going to affect them in their life. So when they're at school, because if they have the information that, oh, the tooth fairy's actually, not real or whatever, and they go to school with that information. Oh my God, that's a catastrophe, isn't it? So I suppose you're always bearing in mind that exactly, the parents. You're not just sort of raising the child with that. Let's just be honest, and let's tell them the truth about everything. But you have to remember that they are fitting into a society and into a culture as well. So it's very, very tricky.
It's interesting. Maya's 7 now, but when she was 5.5, thereabouts, she came out of school and she was quite upset about being different. And I thought something had happened. First of all, there had been a little boy that told her she's kind of sallow-skinned, like I am normally when I don't have my winter skin. And this boy had told her that if she drank cow's milk, she would be whiter. So that was the first thing, because she had soy milk for her break. And then she was upset about being different, but it turns out, so I thought, I'm going to have this conversation now, because she's getting to a stage where she could maybe make decisions for herself and maybe can't stop them or change them. Anyway, it turns out it wasn't about her being vegan, it was about everyone else not being vegan. So that's what she was upset with, and she said often if she could change anything, she wishes everybody else could be vegan too. So I mean, that's lovely, but that's not going to, our experience isn't always going to be positive. And it's difficult. You don't want your kid to be bullied about anything, but they are. So it's a difficult situation that you're essentially purposely setting them up for some kind of conflict.
And that drive to fit in is really strong, isn't it? It's almost as we've evolved, that drive to fit in is very important, because we as humans, we thrive in communities, in groups, and when you don't fit into the group, you risk being outcast, you risk being attacked, fending for yourself, being attacked, starvation, death even. So that it's a real primeval drive to fit in and to stay. And especially with children, I think when I remember school is one of the most ruthless places on the planet. I think it's just because kids are ruthless with each other, aren't they? If you're different in any way, they will just sniff that out and be like on you. So that must be quite difficult for youngsters, actually, and especially as you get into teenage years. Who knows if they're gonna kind of start to get influenced by their peers a lot more and fit in with them. That drive to fit in. I would
say though, that's one of the joys of the I don't know, the green revolution or whatever somebody wants to call it, but the plant-based, offerings of all these major fast food joints, So I guess, although we don't go to places like that just now, like McDonald's or whatever, if she did want to go with her friends, I'm assuming if things keep going the way they are, there's going to be something for her to eat there with them. Even though ethically it's maybe not vegan, at least dietary wise it would be vegan, and I suppose maybe that's some kind of compromise for her, but it's going to be her decision ultimately. But it's very difficult. It's difficult for whatever you're doing with your kids to know if you're doing the right thing or not, right? So interesting. Somebody doesn't like the conversation. I'm not sure what that's about, so
Gawain, what's going on? What's going on, Gawain?
What's going on?
No, that's just normal.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it's great though that how you're giving your daughter a kind of foundation of what veganism is, and you made that decision, because that's the conversation I had with my family member. I said, if this is something that you want to raise your child, you have. I'd strongly suggest, in my opinion, that you start now, because it's the socialization process is going to start, and it's I think you said in your article, didn't you, the Peppa Pig paradox, which I'd recommend everyone read. It's available in the Journal for Critical Animal Studies. But he talked about actively resisting. We have to resist this kind of
because there's going to be challenges. There's going to be going to be people saying you're doing the wrong thing for whatever reason. I'm lucky in a sense that I know my parents were kind of concerned, but she's been luckily she's been very healthy. I don't know that they would have been so happy with the situation had she not ended up being a healthy young girl, right? So if she'd had any health issues, there would always be, I suppose, maybe a question mark over, is this something to do with her diet? Could it, should she have, maybe, rather than it being, well, actually the reason, aside from the ethics of it, it's incredibly healthy. Why would I not want my daughter to have the most healthful diet I can possibly provide to her? So yeah, very, very difficult, but it is important to start early. Socialization happens before you're even born, essentially, right? People want to know what you have, and I'm having a baby. What kind of question is that? That's not what they mean. They mean, is a boy or a girl? So I can go out and buy the right colour of card and balloon and stuff. And then some people want to know so they can decorate a nursery in a particular colour or whatever. And it's so strong, and that's about gender, which again is another socially constructed idea, the same as carnism or whatever you want to call it. So it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult, but there's no right way to be a parent, is there, anyway? But then you're not helped by all those secondary agents of socialization, just reinforcing the social norm of the culture over and over and over and over again. And that's the tricky part. Sorry, Nella.
I just wanted to ask you something. Do you think that if we're honest with kids, they make their own choices? I'm thinking of my niece. She's 5 years old, and her parents, she used to say that we are not allowed to eat other animals. And her parents told them that you're allowed to eat whatever you want. We choose not to eat other animals.
Oh, the choice.
What do you choose? And
it's interesting.
She said that she would never eat another animal.
Good.
So it was her choice.
Yeah.
In some ways.
There was a study recently which I mentioned in the article. I've forgotten the year and the authors, because there's so many references, and that's ridiculous, by the way. Where it's one of the few studies that have been done on vegetarian children, not vegan children, but they were looking at kids who have been raised vegetarian, kids who are not vegetarian and nor is their family, and kids who have become vegetarian but their family still isn't. And the strongest ethics in this study were the kids who had become vegetarian in a non-vegetarian family, and they'd done it because of some external person, for the most part, who had influenced them by telling them something about how animals are treated. The vegetarian kids from vegetarian families were actually less, they had been less moved. It's just part of their everyday existence, rather than, I guess it becomes, if vegetarianism is the norm, you're maybe not as shocked as if it isn't, perhaps. So it's really interesting that when kids were told by others the truth, so to speak, they did make a conscious decision. How that went down in their families, I don't know. I don't think that was involved in the study, but it was about the motivations behind their dietary choices that they've made. So sorry, I'm banging on.
And that was my story. It was exactly that. When I was young, and I with a friend of mine, we used to look after the other animals at school, and we always used to bring them home in holidays and things like that. And when I made the connection that the lambs in the field were the lambs on the plate, that was it for me. It was just and it was so strong.
I'm envious you were a child when that happened. I was in my 20s before that happened to me. And then I was appalled at myself, because I consider myself to be a fairly smart individual, right? And yet 2 + 2 didn't equal 4 in that particular instance. So,
but then it goes back to all that, everything we're talking about is so deep, so embedded, this socialization. And actually that period, those formative years of like 0 to 6, 0 to 7, maybe, those years of when beliefs are being formed in children, because I don't know if I'm fascinated with brains and human behavior and things like that. But those first years, the brain waves that children are experiencing are generally, it starts, I think, with delta waves 0 to 2 years old, the theta waves 2 to 6, and then I think it's what does it go to after that? Then it goes to alpha. But for most of those formative years, children are in a kind of hypnotic state where it's called like a super learning state, where they're just kind of absorbing everything in like a sponge from the environment and from experiences. But they don't really, it's almost like being hypnotized. It's the same waves that the adults have when they're in meditation or in sleep and things like that. So it's the same kind of waves, the brain waves. So they're just absorbing and taking everything, and they'll believe pretty much anything you tell them. They don't really distinguish, I think, reality from dreamlike state. It's a very strange state that they're in. So they just take everything in, and then those beliefs are very, very deeply embedded, and they might not even be conscious, but they still show out in your behavior later on in life and your experiences and your choices. So I think we have to remember this as advocates when we're speaking to adults, that actually this is the power of our belief systems. It's so powerful.
So how does children's literature and films play into their socialization? Because it's a big part of their daily lives.
What food you mean, Nella? Sorry.
I was asking how is children's literature and films play, what is the role they play in their socialization? Because it's a big part of their lives, their books and the films they watch and the series they watch.
Yeah, when you were talking about hypnotic states earlier, Wendy, I just had visions of my daughter sitting in front of the telly every morning, like, she's like, hello, she's there, you know, she's not there. Yeah, not anymore. She's gone past that, thankfully. Well, I don't know, it's going to be the bane of my life, Peppa Pig, isn't it now? I forgot the question, sorry. Yeah, I have forgotten the question.
Oh, sorry. Don't worry. About children's films and literature.
Films, yeah, yes. I mean, the thing is, especially when there is a moment in children's development where fact and fiction are indiscernible, right? They can't really tell the difference between them. And that's, I suppose, when the power of these messages, because the thing is, the stuff doesn't come on the TV and say, "Oh, eat meat." This is not one of those kind of cows. The stuff that comes on the TV is just very, very subtle a lot of the time. It's just there, or it's stuff that's not said rather than things that are said. So the power of that in terms of permeating a brain are huge in terms of all these different waves. It's not my specialty, brain chemistry, I'm afraid, but yeah, very, very powerful. So it's the stuff, to be honest, I think somebody could study this till the end of their lives and not get to the bottom of it. If that was the only thing they had to do is figure out how powerful the socialization process is. It's huge.
I think there's a few academics who are relying on that right now, I think.
Yeah. They could loan me some of their funding, I'd be very grateful.
Yeah. Well, what I would want to say is, just as a commentary on what's been said so far, especially picking up on what Wendy said, is I've mentioned this before. There's a philosopher called David de Grazer, and he says that it takes an extraordinary strength of mind to be vegan in a non-vegan world, and it's that thing that Zygmunt Bauman talked about, which is the idea that you're swimming against the tide, and of course that you're kind of setting yourself up for difficulties. That might be one of the things to do with Tom Reagan's revolving door. And then the other thing, and going on to an issue that I know Nella wanted me to raise, it's intergenerational. This socialization thing is quite interesting, and the fact that a lot of adults can use their childhood socialization as a cultural resource. And one example of that is when I used to give talks, especially at universities, to non-vegans. The first thing I used to do is hand out pen or pencil and paper, and ask people to draw a farm. Give them 5 minutes to draw a farm, and they would always do a line drawing which was very similar to the kind of things that you would see in the early day reading books. So you'd get a farmhouse, drawn with a bit of smoke out the chimney, but then you'd get chickens and chicks, and you'd get even kind of smiling other animals and this kind of stuff. The only people that have never done that is when I gave a talk at my university in Bangor in North Wales, and there's two vegans there, and they drew broiler units and battery units and this kind of stuff, right? And nobody else has ever done that because they don't know. But what I always say about that is that it's the mind's eye farm we're dealing with here. So it's the farm that people know about, or it's the farm that they want to know about. In other words, this is the farm that they want to believe is true. And so of all the possibilities, this is the farm that they want to think their food is coming from. And so they really do kind of cling on to it, And so in that sense, childhood socialization is very powerful, even in adulthood. It's not as though we reject it at all. We can use it as a resource, And I think your presentation will probably, because we're going to move on to the Peppa Pig presentation in a minute, but that will probably highlight that a little bit. First off, we're going to talk about a few books. Tom, you've brought yourself, what have you got to show the class, Tom?
Show and tell. Yeah, I've got this book. It's called I Thought I Saw a Penguin by Lydia Nichols, and it was a gift from a family member to my nephew, and so I've had a look at it, and it's basically each page is a series of propositions. I thought I saw a penguin, and the questions are always refer to the penguin as it, and there is the penguin is kind of pictured doing human activities like playing with beach ball, surfing, under the sunshade, building sandcastles. So yeah, and there's a series of other animals as well that are covered: lion, bear, monkey, crocodile, panda, and dinosaur as well. Which I don't know if that speaks to the reverence of certain species of animals.
What year was that published, Tom? What year?
That was published in 2019, so it's quite recent.
It's really interesting that all those species are kind of what we would consider wildlife.
Yeah,
isn't it? Rather than
they are
food animals or those other. I'm getting back to the categorization thing.
I always thought the story, the question was I thought I saw a putty cat. So some of the young people in the chat won't get that cultural reference.
All these animal characters children love, like the ones presented in the book, are very anthropomorphic. Mm-hmm. So in a way, it seems that children don't feel affection for the actual animal, but for this character that acquires agency and subjectivity because they do all this human stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting though that penguin isn't named because Matthew Cole and Kate Stewart talk about having a name when one of these characters has a name. It's like there's permission to have an emotional attachment to this animal now, whereas if it doesn't, it's less likely, and that can kind of create, or keep the blinkers on kind of thing. So I find that really interesting.
Can I ask a question to Lynda and Roger as well, actually? I don't know if you've got an opinion on this, but why do we create characters for children based on other animals so often? Is it because they're naturally drawn to them? Why not just base them on humans? And especially if there's that risk that, for example, when we're going to look at Peppa Pig, using another animal that's categorized in the so-called food category, if there's that risk of creating a connection there, of showing some truth behind that, if there was that risk, why do we even create these characters anyway in the first place, whether it's non-food animals or pet animals or anything? But what do you think that might be about? There's
been a recent study, Roger, I don't know if you're aware of it, talking about intersectionality, and actually that that often by using an animal, I don't think this is always why it's been done by any stretch of the imagination, but by using an animal, you save the problem of having to have a one-size-fits-all human character. You know, in terms of gender, in terms of religion, in terms of skin color, anything else that that you would have to think about. So by using an animal, you're creating that bond and that emotional attachment without it having to be something that a child can recognize themselves in. So that's a fairly recent analysis of something that's been going on for a while. So Roger, I don't know if you've got any other ideas.
No, I mean, I tell you what, a weird thing that popped in my head when you were saying that was that in child abuse situations that they show children a doll and ask them questions in relation to that. I mean, I don't suppose you could then substitute that idea and show them, as it were, a related other animal, with all the right parts, if you like. What happened, and that would get around that problem as well, wouldn't it? Because it's an interesting kind of technique to get rid of the problem of kind of I don't relate to what you're talking about. Yeah. So, but it's interesting, isn't it, that if you jump to another species, you get around the problem of all the complications within
humanity. Yeah. I know.
It's weird that. Going back to Wendy's question, Jim Mason answered that really in An Unnatural Order. It's a really good book from the 1990s. I think it's 1990s. Might be later than that. And
you sure it's 1990s, Roger? Are you absolutely sure?
No, it's not. Well, I know it's not the 1980s anyway, Wendy. So that's a bit. Yeah. And so, but because he's basically arguing that other animals are kind of the most dynamic and kind of living thing on the planet, and that we're naturally kind of attracted to them on some level. And I suppose there must be the issue that, well, he's talking about free living beings, and even tapping into the kind of socialization which is secondary, which you get from things like the David Attenborough type programs, So again, we do have and we maintain a fascination with other animals, but usually all the programs that we know most about are about free living beings. And now there's hardly any of them left as well, which is a deep irony. And so we don't tend to, you don't get David Attenborough going around a farm. He's going around a jungle, isn't he, with free living beings, which is really kind of interesting. With a particular weird kind of focus on the other animals' sex lives.
And do you think? I know we've got to jump onto Lynda's thing in a minute because obviously time and stuff. But do you think that if when we anthropomorphize these other animals, like pigs who are in that food category, do you think that by that anthropomorphizing, that they're so removed from their real life counterparts that it doesn't risk that connection? So you're kind of giving them a character, but it's so humanized that. Oh, I thought you were frozen. I think my connection is really bad. Sorry. That you actually, there's no real connection to that real life other animal. There's the child does not really connect because they're very different to the real life animal, if that makes sense. Yeah. So you probably lost half of that with my connection.
No, I got it. No, I got it. Certainly. I know that Brett Mills queries that about Peppa Pig. Actually, is one of the few people that have written about her before. I say her. Yeah, it's a character. But it's interesting because there has to be enough of the animal species themselves, and it's very, very seldom that there isn't anything at all to do with the species that this animal is representing. They're wearing clothes and they're going to work and all this kind of stuff. That's all there. But in the case of Peppa, for example, they're still oinking and muddy puddle jumping, and that they've still got the wee curly tails and whatnot, and he says, I think the quote is, their piggishness is inescapable. They're still quite clearly pigs, even though nothing that they do is pig-like in terms of their everyday life. The fact that they have an everyday life with a kind of a timetable. I don't know, Roger, if you've got any.
Well, I think earlier examples of what Mary was saying and what you just said about human clothing. I think like Top Cat, and Yogi Bear. Those kind of characters have got no kind of real real kind of connection to the, you know, to the animals that they're based on. Whereas the weird thing about it, and going to what Mr. Turner here is saying, is this thing about the jolly animal-loving farmer. And so this is one of the books that I looked at, Tales from Mud Puddle Farm. There's Farmer Rafferty in this, who's always smiling, except for a couple of times. But the weird thing is, he's got things like this. If you can see it, he kind of says, if you look after me, I'll look after you. So there's a kind of contract, you know, a bit of a social contract created. And sometimes it goes wrong. And so, for example, the mouser doesn't do her job properly, and so she's in trouble. And again, this thing about the smiling character there. And that one with the hens is based on the idea that they give their eggs as rent, which is really kind of interesting. And then there's this one, which I think is the most ideological statement in the book, which is that the cows, and there's no sign of any calves on the farm at all, and there's no questioning about that, of course, but the cows let their milk down for him, right? Yeah. And so it's really kind of interesting. That's a real kind of ideological statement there, because, well, I mean, I said in one of my videos that kind of means that there's a suggestion that they can somehow keep it up or something, which is kind of biologically impossible, probably. So, you know, it's really kind of interesting the way that they build on these kind of stereotypes.
There was a study recently at Edinburgh that talked about kids believing there was a reciprocal arrangement in place. That very thing you're talking about. Yeah. So in return for food and shelter and safety, I will give and take, and that kind of thing. I mean, a lot of people say that, don't they? Well, you know, and also they go back to one of the main things that people do is talk about something you said, Lynda, early on, which is that everybody seems to think that other animals have a function, even to the extent that antelopes are made for lions to eat. And of course, that's not true. You know, it's not as though you know they're set up in that way, unless you've got some kind of divine kind of plan. Finally, the one that I want to show you. This is the book that Babe is based on. Now, that's quite fascinating, in the sense that one of the things I mentioned in my PhD was that there's a section in the film which is not in the book, and the section is that a cat tells Babe what normally happens to pigs. That they don't normally are seen as a sheep pig. They're normally killed and eaten, and that's probably what's happened to all of his family. And he's so shocked by this that he runs away. Yeah, and this is towards the kind of end, just before the big kind of thing where he wins the prize and all that. But then he comes back again, and it's kind of like his loyalty to the farmer, who is called the boss in the film. So his loyalty to the farmer overweighs the fact that this farmer has also just murdered Babe's family. Yeah. Again, a completely ideological kind of statement built in there. You know, it's incredible. But it's not actually in the book. It's just in the film. I didn't know that. I've never read that book, so I didn't know what was missing. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's not in there. Yeah, or at least I haven't seen it. But then again, I did read it, but maybe I missed it. But I don't know. So, Lynda, I think we're going to probably, time-wise at least, move on to your presentation.
I'm just going to put my light on. I've now realised I'm sitting in the dark, so give me a second.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Well, I'll tell people about. I'll tell people about technology whilst you're doing that, because
brilliant.
I'm using a different computer at the moment, folks, and I learned how to show a PowerPoint, and I came to do it again today, and I've forgotten how to do it. so therefore, we've got a different way of doing it, and so this is the screen we're going to use. So Lynda, when you want to change the PowerPoint, I'm going to have to scroll. Okay, so. It's not quite as good, but it'll have to do.
Okay, my very lovely 7-year-old vegan has just joined us.
Yes, I saw that. Hello, 7-year-old vegan. How are you doing?
Everyone's saying hello to you.
What's her name, Lynda?
Her name's Maya.
Maya. Hi, Maya.
Hi, Maya.
Saying hi.
Hiya,
I've
Maya.
got my headphones in. Hiya, Maya.
Hiya, Maya.
Okay, well, let's just get started then about this thing.
Yes. Go for it. And
okay.
And we'll just jump in with questions, I'm sure, but carry on, yeah.
I'm not going to relay the entire paper. People can go read it. But it's kind of interesting that the subtitle for this, well, Pig Ignorance, I called it, the Peppa Pig Paradox. And it's looking at children's consumption and how that's contradictory, just as we've been discussing just now. So I don't know if everyone's familiar with who Peppa Pig is, but she's been on TV for 17 years now. I thought it was 14 the other day, but I checked and it's now nearly 17 years. Hundreds of episodes aired every morning on free-to-view TV across not just the UK, but across most of the world. So it's really interesting that this was prompted by a bunch of stuff which I'll talk about in a minute, but really, although there's been some studies into why people love animals but eat other animals, there's never been anything into why people loved animals but eat the same animals. A few people have mentioned it. Hal Herzog mentions it. Whoop, I'm on a wheelie chair, honey. Could you change the slide, Roger, if that's okay? Thanks. Or scroll or something, that'd be great. Thank you. Those are the main kind of mostly social psychological explanations so far. So the meat paradox is about a decade old now, actually, and that's looking at why it is that people would maybe love dogs and eat cows, right? Same old story. So that's been quite interesting, and it came up with a bunch of different reasons, but mostly to do with cognitive dissonance. So we have behaviours that we perform, and we have a belief system, and the two don't always match. So sometimes there needs to be some kind of wiggle room there. So you either change your behaviour, maybe go vegan, go vegetarian, if you're uncomfortable with that juxtaposition, or you have to change your belief system. Well, I'm not sure that those animals feel the same pain as other animals. I'm not sure that, not giving them theory of mind, essentially. And a lot of the reasons that people give or why they continue to eat meat, even if they know that it's harmful to animals, clearly death is the ultimate harm. Here's the four ends of meat eating. So they either believe it's natural, or they've made themselves believe that they have to have it. Humans can't survive without it. We've always done it, right? We've got canines. People tell you you've got canines even though you don't have canines. You really don't. And that flits along also to it being normal, right? Everyone does it, so why should I stop? Me changing what I do is not going to change the world, so that kind of thing. Everyone does it, it's just the norm. That's not the case everywhere, but for the most part, certainly in these parts. But that it's necessary that somehow if we don't eat meat, we're going to be deficient in something. The first thing that often I hear about people mention about she looks so healthy. They're expecting some anemic, waif of a child when she's healthy, and she's same with me, and I'm brown, but that's genetics. It's nothing to do with being vegan. So, and then the last one, which has been added on latterly, is that people will just say, but it's too nice. I'm not willing to change what I do because I guess it's selfishness, really, if you want to put it like that. This tastes good, and my taste buds override any kind of moral judgment that I'm going to make about one species or another. So that's the kind of basis upon which the article that I wrote is kind of based. Now, the next few things really link to a lot more sociological kind of viewpoints. A lot is still social psychology, the one and the same, really. So the fact that just people think that we're more important, so we can do what we like with other species, and that would apply to any, not just food animals. So I've mentioned speciesism there. Carnism, which is Melanie Joy's PhD, that this is so, just what we're talking about, it's so ingrained, it's dominant, it's there, but we don't even realise that it's there. So it's like this opposite of veganism. The fact that we categorise animals as food or other categories, and the fact that often how we speak about them, the language that they use. So I've mentioned there about discourse, the fact that, that's why I called it pig ignorant at the beginning. We say pig ignorant like it's a bad thing, which implies that piggishness is a negative, as much as a pejorative term, right? Somebody's a fat pig, a lazy pig. People use this all the time. They don't say a very intelligent pig, do they? So it's that kind of language. And also the mass nouns. I think Tom said something earlier, and he said fishes. But people don't tend to say fishes if they're not vegan anyway. They say fish. It's like fish is like a one thing, or it's a conglomerate of things. But actually, each one of those is an individual being. But that's not something that people will acknowledge. So just the fish counter.
Tom's awkward like that. We don't really have time for this, but Lynda, maybe you can ask what for me is a movement question. What's the difference between speciesism and carnism for you?
I think speciesism is much more accepted as an acknowledged, the kind of hierarchy. We're at the top, the food chain kind of stuff we're taught. I think that is about us having not dominion but dominating all these other species, whereas carnism is much more about the practice of the eating of the animals. Although they're the same in terms of what happens at the end of them, I would say that speciesism is much more acceptable. If you call somebody a speciesist, I don't know if that's not really an insult, but it maybe should be. If somebody's being speciesist, I think it's much more acceptable than if they're carnist, because it's much more individual, whereas speciesism is maybe more about us. Can I just
ask while we're on this point, actually, because you said that carnism is the opposite of veganism, Lynda, but I would say that if carnism is relating to the eating of other animals, that actually it's not actually opposite. It's more a subcategory, I would say, isn't it, of speciesism? Carnism.
I think that's fair enough, actually. Yeah, I think carnism is much more about the individual practice of a speciesist humankind, if you like. Hi, Cat. So yeah, it's difficult, to be honest, because as with all these things, even with mine, I'm just developing an idea that's already been there. Speciesism as a term has been around for decades, so and Melanie Joy was only writing quite recently about this, so it's just kind of picking in a little bit more at things. And that's what I did really with the meat paradox. I decided, up the top right there, it says savoury menu. You'd be wondering what that's about. But this was a Peppa Pig kids party menu. And I don't know if everybody can read that, but the first item in the lunchbox there is a ham sandwich. So you can hire this company to come in, and they've got people dressed as Peppa and Peppa stuff and streamers and all this kind of stuff. And the third item in there is a cocktail sausage. Just the one, stingy or what, right? Anyway, there's a ham sandwich in there and there's a cocktail sausage in a Peppa Pig themed party, specifically designed for parents to buy for children. It almost like, that's that moment of this seems really bizarre. So that's what really I was looking at. And on the next slide that Roger will scroll, there it is. Here are some of this is the problem, right? This pig has permeated the lives of children worldwide. I wrote down, I had to read my paper again, it's been a little while, but on the top left there, that's some of the merchandise you get. It's just a tiny selection. There's clothes, there's everything. And it's worth $171.5 billion a year, merchandise alone. So to translate that, that's 143 billion euros, 124 billion pounds, right? That's a shed load of money. And that's just the stuff. That's not even the programme. There's a Peppa Pig World down at Paulton's, down south of England somewhere. And I looked it up. Today's price, well, we can't book today because they're shut at the moment because of COVID. If you turn up on the day, it costs a family of 3, that's 2 adults and 1 child, £125 just to get in. That's just to get in the door. So there's a lot of money in this character. On the bottom right is really what prompted this paper, which was a trip to a Peppa Pig live show. And before it, there was some kids and all their lovely Peppa clips and hair things and bags and all that, sitting eating a ham sandwich and a ham salad thing in a cafe next door. And at the break, you could order a little munchie box, and it was either cheese or ham. I'm like, this is just wrong. Nobody see that this is wrong. And then at the top right there is the cinema experience, which, as you know, in most, I think we went to the View Cinema, other brands are available, or maybe not soon, the way things are going. Hot dog stand, right? So there's kids lining up to go and see Peppa. It was the opening weekend we went, and there was actually somebody dressed as Peppa there. And there they all were, standing at the hot dog stand, waiting for a hot dog, which, as you know, isn't made from dogs. Very bizarre. So these are the things that prompted it, but it's everywhere. And she's multinational. So on the next slide is an example. If you go to Peppa Pig World and pay £125 to get in, that's just the entry, that's not even the food. You will find on there menu in the cafeteria, tuck in at Daddy Pig's Cafe and have a pepperoni pizza. Really? Anyway, it's just these kind of fundamental things. There's a current tour in London, again, off at the moment because of COVID, but I think it's going to be starting up again. Some Peppa Pig tour of London on an open top bus and whatever. And they at least are not serving pigs, but they still have chicken on the menu. And I'm like, oh, it's a little bit problematic. There's some Peppa Pig gummies or little chews, like kind of fruit gum type things there. They've got gelatin in them. They specifically say beef gelatin, mind you. Most places don't say. And if it doesn't say, it's likely to be pig gelatin because it's cheaper. And the Peppa Pig jelly that's there has pig gelatin in it. And it's just beyond the pale that they would use a dead pig to market a fictional pig. Anyway, round of applause to
Lynda, do you think they had a bit of a giggle about that, or do you think they didn't notice themselves that they were doing it?
No, I don't think people think about it. I don't think they think of gelatin as being something from a dead animal that people would, unless they're thinking about particular religious requirements. I don't.
Yeah,
think
but I'm on about the people who made it rather than consuming it. You know,
it's interesting actually because I asked to use this image in the paper, and they had a bit of an issue with it. So just to be very clear, all images remain the copyright of their owners as we speak. I hope not. It's like the Percy Pig Marks and Spencer sweets, right?
Yeah.
They had pig gelatin in them. Then they made a veggie version. And you're like, yeah, just make them all vegetarian and everybody's happy and there's no issue. Eventually they did. And then there was an outcry.
Absolute outrage, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Piers Morgan was shouting on TV. I'm kind of missing him. I'm kind of missing him already, to be honest.
Anything that makes Piers Morgan scream and shout is good in my book.
Well, I guess
we're on the right track.
I was hoping they would let me. I mean, I mentioned him in the paper as well, but he's not taking umbrage with it yet, which is most annoying. So, anyway, but there are some things. So, for example, we could make this range of vitamins. There's vitamin D and whatnot, and they're shaped like Peppa Pig's heads, and they've not got anything, and they're vegan. That's how it should be, and that's a little bit of thought just as to what's happening. You know, the veggie Percy pigs weren't vegan anyway. That is true. But at least, I know there's no such thing as least when you're vegan, but it wasn't pigs. There wasn't pigs in the pig product. People buying, oh, I love pigs. There's another thing, actually, just to tangent for a moment. I used to have a toy cow collection. I really love cows. Highland cows especially, and their big lovely eyelashes, and I'd stop at the side of the road and feed them and stuff. I loved them. And then I would eat a beef burger and not think anything of it. So there's lots and lots of people that have a toy pig collections and little pig ornaments and stuff that will still have bacon fried on a Saturday morning, right? This happens a lot. So these are the kind of things that are kind of examples of how this is really got into our psyches, and we don't really challenge it. And on the next slide, I'm just kind of giving you kind of an overview of what the Pig paradox is on about. I wish I hadn't used.
I'm scrolling.
Thank you.
We're going to continue with this, folks. So if you can stay on.
Yeah. All right. Yes. sorry.
Yeah.
I'll get on with it.
It was my fault. I brought you in too late. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. So yeah, I mean, I've basically said it already, though. This socialization process that we've been talking about this evening is normalized to the point where nobody questions anything. And there's a little girl there tucking into some kind of wurst or other. Now, it might be a Moving Mountains hot dog in their very nice spot. I doubt it. And then you have to think, well, it's not the kids' fault, right? This is down to the people socializing these children. And I kind of suggest in the paper that it might just be strategic ignorance. It's easier not to acknowledge this. It's easier not to have to deal with the fallout. It's easier to carry on regardless and hope they don't ask any questions than to be the only vegan in the village, kind of an idea, right? It's really so. And there's people. There's a couple of studies that I used to support this. There's people who actually will say I would rather just not know. And if you're going to give me information that's going to make me have to change my mind, I don't want the information. They're purposely ignorant, willfully ignorant of this, pig ignorant, hence the paper, right? And I don't suggest this in the paper, but I've suggested it since, that this is exploitative of not just the animals that are being eaten, but the children. Yeah. To not be honest with them, and to not, if they ask, be honest, to tell them the truth.
Just going to ask you, sorry, Lynda, I was just going to ask you about that, because actually there's in marketing, there's huge, like massive marketing directed specifically towards children, aren't there? Like you only have to look at your McDonald's, Ronald McDonald, or the king of Murder King, and Captain Birdseye. You know, they're all, you know, these big characters aimed directly at children to get them really hooked on their food, and then obviously they provide them the toys. You go out for your Happy Meal with the happy farmed animals on the box and all that, and it's really actually a lot of it is quite strategically directed towards children, isn't it?
Plus pester power, right? Kids see something, I want, and if you don't have the strength or the energy or the knowledge or the skills to be able to do something different, it's a real.
Well, pester power was one of the things that you know, the McLibel trial. Pester power was one of the things that McDonald's was convicted on. You know, I think they won about 3 of the 6 and they lost about 3 of the 6, and one of them was pester power. Yeah.
Really, really fast. I mean, Burger King did it with Chicken Run with the movie, which I've got later on. They actually had, you can go and get a chicken burger, and you can also get a little chicken from like a little figure of the animated chicken. Just bizarre. And I also mentioned, because I did a little bit of research for the Masters as well, that this is applicable to other food species, so to speak, and I put that in inverted commas, including fishes, right? I've said fish there, I appreciate. I had a look at a lot of the aquaria around the UK, and almost all of them have fish on their menu. And somewhere, Deep Sea World, which claims to be Scotland's national aquarium, has fish goujons and kids' parties and fish and chips for the grown-ups. And it's like, you go in an aquarium and you're going to sit in a cafe and eat a fish? Like, I don't even think you have to be massively ethically vegan to think there's something wrong there.
Well, the challenging point there, though, Lynda, would be from a species point of view. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not have your cake and eat it? Because you can watch them and marvel, and then you can go and eat them. You know, there's enough of them to do that. You know, there's enough to watch.
I know there's so many of them. We don't even count them in death figures. We just do it by the ton, don't we? So perhaps that is again, and then we're back to socialization again, right? This is all down to what we're taught to be the norm, and this is the problem. And until we start altering that or being a little bit more open, which I think is starting, although it's taken a while. Anyway, I digress a little bit. So on the next slide, I've just given some examples of movies, including Chicken Run, and some TV programs, all of which Shark Tale maybe not so much, to be honest. I was thinking I could have put Bambi in there, but animals that people would be likely to eat, perhaps, right? And Timmy Time is the only other children's TV show that exists for younger children anyway that has an animal as a lead character that is an edible species, so to speak, right? I mean, technically all animals are edible if you want to go there, but we're not having that conversation.
There was a film called Farmyard, wasn't there? Because that was weird in the sense that you had all the male bulls who had udders. Yes,
that happens a lot though. In my cow collection aforementioned, people used to buy me all sorts of cow tat, right? I've got like a kitchen roll holder and a money box and all of them have horns and teeth. I don't really know why they all have udders and anyway.
Well, just to continue that, I put a thing on TikTok recently. There was a thing where the farmers brought a couple of farmed animals into a park in Dublin, and they invited people to try to milk a cow, and so the new, the kind of TV news came down and filmed it. And so there's a woman there trying to, pulling and pushing and all the rest of it, and trying to do that. And she goes, "Oh, I think he's going to fart." I think he's going to fart, and she's milking a cow. I mean, where do you go with that kind of ignorance?
I don't, but you can understand it, especially when you're talking earlier about the difference between urban life and rural life, right? It's quite feasible that most people have never seen a cow in their life, right? Or a lot of people, I know, not most people. I'm exaggerating there. Why would you ever have gone to a real farm? You might have gone to the city farm, but you've probably never been to a real farm. And that's why you get all those drawings, Roger. You know, that's all people know. Their only reference point is all the books that they've seen, and whether or not they know better.
And they don't understand that the cows are mammals that need to get pregnant and have a child,
right?
In order to produce milk. I think there's that as well. And I remember as a kid, like people who say, "Oh, why do cows produce milk?" And they used to say because they eat grass. And there was they made that a linear connection. It was like, so you think that cows produce milk because they eat grass? I remember as a kid believing that.
But again, that goes back to the lack of education. All mammals, all mammalian females, right, have to feed their young with that. I mean, it's just a fundamental basic, but it wouldn't pay industry. And then that gets us into a whole discussion about capitalism and profit making and big business, which is massively involved in this, although it's not mentioned too much in the paper. That's what it comes down to. Nobody wants to be, if the profit's there, you don't want to be turning people's minds too much about it, Anyway, there's loads of examples there, and then the very last couple of slides I put up. One of them, I'm conscious of time. The next one is a few books that might be of interest to people who want to read a bit more about it. Matthew Cole and Kate Stewart's book is there on the left, Our Children and Other Animals, and that's really looking at how our view of animals is shaped in childhood. So that's very much about the socialization process. Melanie Joy's book is there as well, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs and Wear Cows. These are more accessible than others that I could point you to, I think. Hal Herzog's Some We Love, Some We Hate, Some We Eat. And again, it's just this kind of, it all comes down to the socialization process and putting things in boxes and sticking labels on them and then treating them in a particular way because of that. The same as we do with people. Hey, bud. Animals on Television is down the bottom there. That's Brett Mills, and he has a chapter on Peppa Pig, although not about, you're right, baby, watch that. I'm
not familiar with that one. Is that good?
It's quite recent, yeah. Palgrave published it, I think. It's really interesting, looking at all sorts of different elements of animals on TV, not just childhood cartoons and whatnot. So, yeah, I recommend it.
There's quite a lot of I was going to say there's quite a lot of animal advocacy type books for Palgrave.
Yes. Oh my! They had a sale on last year. I near skinned myself. And then up the top there is that's quite recent as well. Christoph Dawn and Gordon Hodson from Kent University, I think. Why We Love and Exploit Animals. So again, it's all these things are looking at the inconsistency and where that starts. And just give me
Lynda,
a second. Hold on.
I've got a question on this as well.
Hang on. No paper. Okay, sweetie. Take some out of the printer, darling. Sorry, Wendy.
Lynda, sorry, I was going to ask you, going back to Kate Stewart and Matthew Cole's paper that they did on this whole kind of socialization process. It was interesting to see that actually categories are given to other animals are not just defined by their species, and actually that but more like maybe characteristics, so that one species of other animal can have several functions and several roles. And they give the example of a rabbit. So it's not just that we put one species in one box and go, right, they are in the vermin category, they are in the food category. It's like a rabbit can have several different functions in each of those categories. And that's what helps the disconnect as well, isn't it? When you said about people being in the aquarium and eating fishes, of course they can, because fishes have many different roles. Yeah,
and they're not usually eating exactly the same species of fish either. A lot of the time. So again, it's like this kind of handy. It's the red grey squirrel kind of argument. You know, like these are good squirrels and these are bad squirrels, but they're squirrels, so just leave them be. But yeah, and I mentioned that actually I've got another paper coming out later in the year about kids' TV last summer, and one of them acknowledges Peter Rabbit and how, you know, in some cases rabbits are little fluffy bunny pet things, but in terms of Peter Rabbit, he's seen as a pest to the farmer, but he's also the prey of the owl and the fox and so on. So it's probably a bit more realistic in terms of how people view it than a little fluffy rabbit.
What about Bugs Bunny? Isn't there a farmer always trying to shoot Bugs Bunny?
Oh, that's true. What's his name again? I forgot about him. Little guy with the eye. Anyway, yes. So there's lots of examples, and these are just some of maybe the more recent books to have a look at. There's been stuff written about this for a long, long time. I'm not going to claim any kind of unique point of view here, really. The very last slide, though, takes is the kind of counter to some of the books that you guys were talking about earlier, and they're just some of them. There's absolutely tons. Ruby Roth's books are there. Vegan is Love, V's for Vegan. There's also another one, That's Why We Don't Eat Animals. Vivi the Super Vegan, Stephen the Vegan, and even if you don't want it to be vegan, there's a lot of really great books that encourage us to get our kids to think a little bit kinder towards animals. Dave Loves Chickens, there's another one just come out as well, I forget. Dave loves some other animal, forget. Sorry, that's not very useful. But it's all about, all of these are promoting compassion and love and a holistic view of the world, rather than we're at the top of a food chain and everybody else is below us. So Gwen the rescue hen is there as well. See, she's on the front of a bike. It's interesting because in the V is for Vegan book, for example, that's for young kids, and I got that from Maya several years ago. It does show you, you know, it's based on a rhyme. And it'll talk about, you know, A is for animals, friends, not food. I could probably get you right to Z, to be honest, I know off by heart. But there's a few bits in it that just hint at what are, you know, there's a picture of a white rabbit with the line through, you know, no experiment, non-animals, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's great. These things are great and they're available. And I think, again, though, this is a fairly recent development in the land of kids' fiction. Hold on, my darling, just 2 more minutes, okay? So it would be worth getting a hold of one if you have some vegan little people around, or you want to gift a book that doesn't say vegan on it. There are some there that maybe make some other people's non-vegan children and non-vegan children just think a little bit, because I think they just need to maybe just have that prompt. You know, if somebody had said to me when I was eating a beef burger years and years ago, given the kind of person that I know I am, I'd have been horrified and I'd have stopped eating it straight away. But no, they said. And I talk about, you know, asking my gran why they called what she was eating tongue. She says, because it's a tongue, hen. I was like, it's a what? It's a tongue. Aye, it's a tongue. I was like, oh, okay. And I didn't ask anymore. And then I didn't, and I say as well, I don't think I even knew I had an option. I think that's the other thing. I don't think it was an optional thing. You eat what you get given and you'll like it. So if we can just start to get I wonder about that. Kids are amazing little things in there. Like you say, Wendy, they're sponges. So you just have to put the sponge in the right water. Sorry, I can't think of something. You know, anyway. Are you a sponge?
I like that.
Noise to the gallery. You're like a sponge because your brain is taking in all this information, honey, all the time. Like a sponge taking the water, exactly. That's how you're a sponge, yeah. It's not. It wasn't being rude, honey. But she's also a living being in the ocean. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's our bedtime and it's my turn.
If anybody wants to listen to Ruby Roth talk about her books, you go to AR's own podcast. There's a few on there, I think, because she was one of the first authors to kind of do this in a way. She was, wasn't she? So,
and people thought she was off her rocker, you know, and now look.
Yeah, there's a couple of TV interviews, isn't there, where they're giving a real hard time.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, it gives me a bit of hope for the future. Because I mean, I've Roger, you've been vegan longer than me, but I've been vegan 25 years or so, and I never thought I would see what's happened so far in my lifetime.
just a beginner then, Lynda. Just a beginner.
I'm a noob. But it's the fact that if you go anywhere and there's probably a vegan option or a plant-based option, I should say. It's not always vegan, but a plant-based option. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that would be happening. So I have hope. And if everyone just starts challenging, and that's down to us, unfortunately, isn't it? Just to kind of just chip away, drop the right book on the right lap, have a bit of a rant about the Peppa Pig paradox. Somebody might read it. You never know. You never know. You got to try, don't you? So anyway, I'll shut up now.
No, that was great, Lynda. Thank you so much. Really interesting.
Yeah, I have a final question, if I may.
Sure.
You are an activist and you are an academic, so you have insights to both worlds. And I hear you say that it's important for academics not only to write for other academics, but to write also for advocates, and that advocates should have access.
Yes.
And actually, it's very easy to find your articles for free. You give access. So why do you think advocates should get informed about academic articles, academic stuff, topics, whatever?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I was an activist way before I was. In fact, it's activism that led me to academia, because I wanted to know why I went vegan overnight and other people didn't when I told them. Like, I just thought it was like a magic piece of information, and you tell people and then they'll go vegan, and before you know it, anyway, how naive I was. Anyway, I think it's, if you've got something that supports, not all academia related to human-animal interactions is vegan or even remotely plant-based or supportive of the animal side of the equation, non-human animals. But some of this stuff can really lend a hand to the arguments that we're trying to put across. And if you've got support and evidence, it means that it's less likely to get, shot down in flames, so to speak. I do think everything should be free. I think it should be open access. There's no point in academics writing for other academics just because they get a grant to do it. And that's, I made it in the Student Journal of Vegan Sociology now, which is great, and that's proper free access. I hadn't realised till I wasn't a university student that you can't get access to half this stuff, and even open access journals don't publish for free. People can read it for free if you want them to, but if you want them to do that, you have to pay the journal up to $3,000, sometimes even more. That's not right. Wow. Information and knowledge like this, that's so, in fact, any information or knowledge should not cost, really. And that's where I think that's a moral discussion for another day, I suppose, really.
Yeah, well, Deb brings that up as well, because we've noticed that in the show. I mean, some of the books that we're interested in, like Steve Best's Total Liberation, David Nybert's new collection. I mean, they're fortune. They cost a fortune,
One of Joan Denaire's books is like a few $100s, I think.
Yeah, it's outrageous. And actually, it's interesting though. I remember trying to get a copy of, I think it's the Encyclopedia of Animal Rights and Animal Welfare. I'm going back a bit now, and I ended up bidding on just about the only copy on eBay, and it ended up costing me about 70 odd quid in the end, because I don't think they published very many of them. Anyway,
is that the one edited by Mark Beekoff?
That's the one. Yeah, okay. And it still sits there, and every time I look at it, I get a bit annoyed because it cost me so much money.
I was going to make a stereotypical joke about Scotland then, but I won't.
I'm the half Scottish bit of me is, as they say, I am stingy. Frugal. Frugal is
frugal.
It's all about the language, right?
That sounds like a better word than stingy, doesn't it? Yeah. So, Lynda, I want to thank you for your presentation and for coming on. And it's been an interesting. I was really looking forward to this one because obviously it's our deal, But it's been I think it's because it's the bedrock. I mean, it's the bedrock of the culture, and the culture is our main target. I mean, this is important to know. And one final question for me is, because you've seen both sides of this, why is psychology seems to be well engaged within the movement, sociology not so much? And I
No.
often wonder that, because when I was doing it, I was thinking, blimey, if I just tell the vegans about this, the movement about this, they're going to be well interested, and they're not really.
No, I know. It's interesting because it's psychology that I first chose when I decided to try and fathom this out. But I think that is partly because the people that the interest in psychology is usually to try and explain behaviour. And I don't think enough people know what sociology is. I say that as a sociology lecturer. You don't. I know, darling, but you're 7. That's okay. That's okay. But I think people are too busy looking at, why did I do this? Why does that person do this? Rather than, why is this happening to us to make us all do this? So I think it's a lack of knowledge about sociology. Thankfully now, there's the International Association of Vegan Sociologists, and this is changing, and Corey Lee Red and others, including myself, are all getting on this, saying, this is long overdue. This really needs to be, I don't even think there was anything sociological really published about animals.
And we should say on that, the Vegan Sociology YouTube channel, there is a longer version of what you've just talked about, isn't there? Yeah,
and a less tired version. Sorry, I was up all night with a brand new rescue puppy, so I'm really tired. It's not my best.
We were forgiven. We forgive you in that.
Thank you. She's very good. So and she's lagging here too. So you can see the presentation from last year's conference. What, honey? I know. I'm gonna have to go soon.
But unfortunately, 7-year-olds don't know everything yet, but almost.
No. Going on 17.
Yeah, of course.
She's fab, though.
Aren't they all nowadays? So, folks, we're going to say goodbye, and thanks again, Lynda. It's been brilliant. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Lynda. That was so great, really.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for the comments.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye, everyone.